Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into what is honestly one of the most dramatic corporate thrillers in modern business history. We are tracing the ultimate boom, bust, and boom again story of Activision. Now, this isn't just your standard dry business case study. No way. This is a complete roller coaster of outright rebellion, near-death financial ruin, and a level of corporate resurrection that is just unprecedented. So, right off the bat, you gotta ask yourself, how exactly did four angry programmers operating out of pure frustration inadvertently invent a $68 billion industry model? Today, the whole concept of a third-party video game developer is just a standard fact of life for us. But back in the late 1970s, it literally didn't exist. The Gang of Four, as they came to be known, had to build the entire concept from scratch. Okay, Section 1, the Atari Rebellion. To really understand the foundation of Activision, we have to rewind to 1979. At the time, console makers, specifically Atari, held absolute, unquestioned power. They completely controlled the development, the publishing pipeline, and, of course, the profits. And nothing illustrates this iron grip quite like this massive financial gob. You had four brilliant programmers over at Atari: David Crane, Larry Kaplan, Alan Miller, and Bob Whitehead. Together, these four guys were bringing in over $20 million for the company, making up a staggering 60% of Atari's total cartridge sales. And their reward? A base salary of around $20,000 each. No bonuses, no public credit on the game boxes. Atari kept them completely anonymous, just to prevent them from being poached by rivals. Well, these programmers finally had enough. In May of 1979, they marched into the office of Atari CEO Ray Kassar to demand royalties and some actual recognition. But Kassar, whose background was actually in the textile industry, just entirely dismissed them. He famously called these highly skilled engineers mere towel designers and claimed that literally anybody could make a cartridge. Ouch, right? That incredible insult was the final straw. They walked out of Atari, teamed up with a music executive named Jim Levy to secure some venture capital, and set out to build their own company. Moving on to Section 2, first independent game publisher. That single moment of rebellion gave birth to a completely flipped script in the gaming world. While Atari treated their developers as, anonymous factory workers under strict corporate control, Activision took a totally different approach. They treated their game developers like rock stars on a record label. Activision proudly put the developers' names right there in the manuals and paid them actual royalties. They packaged the games in these vibrant, brightly colored boxes featuring real in-game screenshots. And they deeply engaged their community, even offering physical patches to any player who mailed in a photograph of their high scores. And let me tell you, this new model was an absolute rocket ship. They officially founded the company on October 1st, 1979, initially calling themselves Computer Arts Inc., but they smartly renamed it Activision, a mashup of active and television, for one very specific, petty reason. So they would show up before Atari in the alphabetical phone book. Brilliant. Starting right out of David Crane's garage, they were soon churning out massive, massive hits. Crane's 1982 game Pitfall alone sold over 4 million copies. By the time of their initial public offering in June 1983, this scrappy garage startup had reached an estimated $157 million in sales. They were absolutely on top of the world. Which brings us to Section 3, the crash and mediagenic. But as we all know, gravity always catches up. Just as Activision was soaring at its absolute highest heights, the entire video game industry essentially fell off a cliff during the infamous crash of 1983. And it all boils down to this incredibly depressing number, $5. See, Activision's wild success had inspired this massive flood of completely unexperienced VC-backed competitors to rush into the market. They mass-published absolute garbage games, which ultimately crashed the entire industry. When those fly-by-night companies inevitably folded, warehouses full of their unsold games were bought up by retailers and just dumped into discount bins for a measly $5. This completely gutted Activision's $40 retail model. Everyday consumers, who honestly didn't know any better, just bought the $5 cheap games instead. Just to survive this brutal market crash, Activision was forced into a severe identity crisis. They enacted massive layoffs, violently slashing their workforce from 400 employees down to just 95. Desperate to avoid bankruptcy, they completely abandoned the console market to pivot to PC games, acquiring the text adventure studio Infocom in 1986. Shortly after that, a new CEO named Bruce Davis took over. And in 1988, in a misguided attempt to branch out into business software, Davis completely abandoned the legendary Activision name, rebranding the whole company as Mediagenic. And it was a total disaster. The shift to business applications failed spectacularly. By 1991, Mediagenic was just bleeding cash, reporting nearly $27 million in losses against a mere $28.8 million in revenue. They had racked up $60 million in suffocating debt, lost their key publishing contracts, and were standing on the absolute precipice of total collapse. Let's look at Section 4, the $500,000 takeover. Just as the curtain was about to close for good, an investor named Bobby Kotick saw something everyone else missed: the dormant power of that original brand. We just talked about how Mediagenic was drowning in $60 million of debt, right? Well, because of that extreme distress, Kotick and a small group of investors were able to execute a hostile takeover of the entire crippled enterprise for a mere $500,000 in 1991. They basically bought a rotting shell of a company solely to get their hands on its legacy assets and that iconic Activision name. Kotick wasted zero time. He immediately enacted a ruthless but undeniably effective restructuring plan. He let go of all but 8 of the company's 150 employees. He pushed through a strict bankruptcy restructuring plan, physically moved the corporate headquarters down to Los Angeles, and, most importantly, completely erased the Mediagenic era by changing the name back to Activision. Leveraging the old Infocom library and distribution networks to start clearing out that massive debt, the resurrected Activision successfully went public again in 1993, raising a crucial $40 million. Against all odds, the Phoenix had officially risen from the ashes, which launches us into Section 5, Building the Acquisition Empire. So, now we're in 1997. The company is stabilized and actually profitable again. Activision realized that the absolute fastest way to accelerate their growth wasn't just building games from scratch anymore, but buying up the very best independent studios on the market. And these strategic acquisitions, they formed the absolute backbone of modern gaming as we know it. They picked up Raven Software in 97. In 2000, they scooped up Neversoft right after the massive success of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. But perhaps their best investment of all time happened in 2003. They purchased a newly formed studio called Infinity Ward for just $5 million. That little studio would go on to create a game called Call of Duty, a franchise that would eventually generate over $12 billion in revenue. Just unbelievable ROI there. Let's wrap up with Section 6, Becoming a Gaming Behemoth. When you trace this timeline from Computer Arts in '79 through the absolute dark ages of Mediagenic all the way to 2008, the evolution is wild. Armed with these massive juggernaut franchises like Call of Duty and Guitar Hero, Activision was no longer just a publisher. They were primed to become a true global media empire. But there was one missing piece. They lacked a massive multiplayer online game, which was the holy grail for steady, recurring subscription revenue. So Kotick orchestrated this monumental merger with Vivendi Games, the parent company of Blizzard Entertainment, specifically to secure the MMO giant World of Warcraft. And with that, a brand new titan was born, Activision Blizzard. And the power plays only got bigger from there. In 2013, the company actually bought back its independence from Vivendi for a jaw-dropping $5.83 billion. Then, reading the writing on the wall regarding the shift in technology, they dropped another $5.9 billion in 2016 to acquire King, the mobile developer famous for Candy Crush Saga. Finally, this unbelievable portfolio of console, PC, and mobile dominance drew the attention of the ultimate buyer. In 2023, Microsoft successfully completed its massive acquisition of Activision Blizzard. When you take a step back and really look at this financial journey, it is genuinely hard to comprehend. We're talking about a $500,000 salvage job in 1991, when the company was literally on death's door. Then, an $18.9 billion valuation during the Vivendi merger, all the way up to a historic $68.7 billion tech acquisition by Microsoft. It's a scale of growth that is just mind-blowing, which leaves us with this final thought. Think back to the beginning. This company was founded by 4 frustrated programmers who just wanted to stick it to a massive, controlling corporation. They wanted to treat developers like rock stars. Fast forward to today, and they are now a vital, foundational part of one of the largest tech megacorporations on the planet. So what should we really take away from all this? It kind of makes you wonder. After rising from the ashes of a $60 million debt crisis to become a nearly $70 billion corporate titan, has that original independent rebel spirit of Activision been lost forever? Or has it simply evolved into the very system it was created to disrupt? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this helped you map out this incredible corporate journey. Keep asking the big questions, and I'll catch you next time.